All of them. U.S. Marine saves 3 dogs from auction. Harbor Springs felt staged for a secret. Red-tipped maples whispering above a farm auction where the lake wind turned breath to smoke and the pens rattled like cages in a dream you can't wake from. Titan came first, gaunt German shepherd, posture unbroken, a soldier pretending not to be cold. Then Luna, a pregnant Doberman curling around a future nobody here planned to pay for. Finally Brutus, scarred Rottweiler with a torn ear and a stare that measured exits, not faces. Men called them stock. The auctioneer's chant hit like nails in tin and coffee steam braided with tractor fumes while a gray-suited man, Simon Caldwell, security patch bright as a warning, checked boxes on a clipboard as if ownership were ink-deep truth. Cole Ramsey slipped from shadow to rail, field jacket zipped to the throat, the dull ache of an old blast living behind his ribs where Scout used to lean, where the leash went light in a storm of grit and fire. He told himself he was only looking, just taking measure, but the air tasted like orders and his boots had already chosen direction. Lena Harper, teenage videographer with a cracked lens and a reckless kind of grace, lifted her camera and found the dog's eyes, then Cole's, and for a blink he saw the story she was writing. Not cruelty, not pity. Threshold. Titan didn't blink. Luna counted breath. Brutus watched the hammer rise and fall and rise again. Caldwell murmured, "Company property," like a lock clicking shut. Cole stepped forward because the distance between them felt like a lie. Wind pushed the lake against the pilings until it sounded like a heartbeat in wood. A map of choices hung in the dust. The kind that redraws a town right here, right now, tonight. What happened next will shock you. Cole Ramsey stood a little apart from the milling crowd, pretending to study sales sheets while his senses mapped the ground like a patrol grid. Hay dust hung in slanting light, metal gates clinked, geese called over the lake, and the auctioneer's chant rose and fell in a hard cadence that made every choice feel mechanical. He told himself he was only passing through Harbor Springs to see an old corporal in Petoskey, yet his boots carried him here, toward 3 cages by the chute and a promise he never spoke aloud. Years before, Iraq baked everything into one color. On patrol near Baiji, a tan shepherd named Scout learned the lull in his breathing, the way his hands moved when he worked nerves into quiet, pressing a shoulder to his knee before alley turns. Pressure changed, a wall blew and the leash went slack. He woke under grit, mouth salted with copper, fingertips finding nothing, pulling back. After discharge he tried carpentry, short security contracts, lake charters, anything that kept his hands busy, but the hollow behind his ribs stayed. Today, it is filled with cold air that smells like diesel, apples and rope. At the ring, mugs steamed, quilted vests rustled, numbers flashed on a plywood board, everything felt rehearsed except the 3. In the first, Titan stood with a straight back, though his sides showed every rib, ears pivoting with patient precision, eyes holding the yard as if nothing would enter without permission. In the second, Luna curled around her belly, finding angles where boards pressed so she could shield the unborn with bone and muscle. In the third, Brutus kept weight off a rear leg, head slightly lowered, torn ear pointed like a pennant toward the man who walked the line with a clipboard. Cole watched reactions. When boots stomped, Titan adjusted his stance. When laughter spiked, Luna shifted enough to put iron between the noise and her body. When coffee splashed, Brutus tracked the arc and stored the motion like a soldier memorizing a doorway. Resilience lived there, not showy, just stubborn and exact. 2 teenage volunteers moved near the rail, neon lanyards swinging. One of them, Lena Harper, carried a camera patched with silver tape and a microphone wrapped in fleece. She balanced on the bottom bar, scanning faces, then the dogs, trying to frame a story that didn't look like outrage for clicks, just proof. She worked weekends for a community channel that streamed parades and school games, and she wanted this auction because a tip said a security company planned to unload seized animals as assets. The man with the clipboard wore a gray suit slim enough to look clean even with dust clinging to the cuffs. A shoulder patch read Caldwell Protective Services. Simon Caldwell smiled without warmth while he flipped paperwork, showing it to anyone who asked and a few who did. Company property, he told a farmer near the hot drink table, recovered during contract enforcement. Every syllable sounded legal. He seldom looked into the cages. When his eyes drifted there, he pivoted outward, toward buyers, toward orders. Cole listened to the chant until he could predict each breath. A bell rang, a calf moved, the crowd reset. He stepped closer, feeling heat off bodies and motors, that heavy mix of animal and fuel that says business gets done whether hearts agree or not. He leaned an elbow on the rail and let Titan see him without posture. The shepherd locked eyes, not pleading, not hard, just measuring. Under that calm he recognized exhaustion so deep it wore steadiness as armor. Luna watched his hands. Brutus tracked his shoulder. He counted injuries without showing it. Uneven weight, scar tissue ridge, skin rubbed raw and under collars, pregnancy near term. His body memory read posture, the way other folks read handwriting. Behind him, Lena asked him to shift so she could film the tag. Her voice held the quick politeness of someone who has learned to move fast before a door shuts. He asked where the footage would run. She named the channel, then said she planned to cut a short piece about rescue and policy because people listen when details ride inside a story. He nodded because he believed it. Scout had taught him that people don't change for rules, they change for faces. Caldwell circled back with a sheaf of forms thick enough to look impressive. He pointed out asset numbers, intake notes, chain of custody lines, and a notice of sale, saying anyone objecting could file after purchase. The animals will be evaluated, he added, and placed according to best practice. The phrasing sounded like shipments and transfers. Bloodless syllables meant to bleach consequence. Evaluation meant distance. Placement meant forgetfulness. The auctioneer tapped the microphone, thanked donors, joked about frost, then moved the board to a new column. Prices rose for tractors, dipped for fencing, and a stack of rubber tubs went fast. Down the fence line, two rough men compared scars like baseball cards and asked how much fight remained in a big dog with a torn ear. A controlled burn climbed through Cole from sternum to jaw, and he smothered it because anger narrows vision. He turned toward gaps in the boards where lake wind slid. Shore smell steadied him. He pictured Scout weaving around gear, nose low, tail describing tidy half circles while the handler muttered plans. That memory carried him through hospital nights when sleep came in stutters and winters on the straights when nothing moved but I. Now it carried him to this crowd, where an old reflex lifted his chin before choices. He didn't have a rescue badge, didn't run a shelter, and didn't own a barn. He had a truck, an honest bank balance, decent credit and a habit of finishing what he started. The stakes lived in that man. If he bid, he needed to win not once but 3 times, because separation would end whatever fragile trust the dog still held. If he won, he needed a place where pregnancy could progress without fear, and wounds could mend without fresh noise. If he lost, he needed a plan that didn't throw rage at a brick. He studied Caldwell again, a man who believed lists could sterilize anything. Lena asked whether he knew the animals. He said no, then yes, because knowing doesn't always come from time. She lowered the camera and admitted she feared one of the big men might buy a dog for the wrong reasons. He didn't promise safety. He told her people sometimes surprise you when a lens is present. She said the live stream already had comments about the shepherd's ribs, the Doberman's belly, and the Rottweiler's ear. He glanced at the screen and saw hearts and question marks drifting upward like small lanterns. The community had started paying attention. A whistle blew. The auctioneer announced a short break while volunteers reset gates. Cole walked the yard, counting exits, counting trucks with space, counting faces with interest that looked like care rather than appetite. He asked a woman from the clinic about capacity. Nora Bennett, hair tucked under a knit cap, said she could triage on site and stabilize but needed consent that nobody yet owned. He thanked her and filed the name. Back at the fence, Titan shifted closer, almost imperceptibly. He didn't reach through because hands can carry too much memory, yet he let his voice find the quiet range. Scout answered across the noise. "Easy, big man," he said. "Hold." Luna eased her chin onto her paws and exhaled fog against the eye. Brutus blinked slowly. Not surrender, not challenge, just acknowledgement. Lena filmed without commentary. Caldwell checked his watch. Workers wheeled a heater toward the ring, and someone shouted about extension cords. The break ended and the chant returned, crisp as boot steps on a drill floor. Every tick of the microphone pushed the next minute closer. Cole measured the bank balance again. He calculated a ceiling, then added 200 because ceilings only hold if you intend to break them when duty requires. He texted the corporal running late, urgent situation. The reply came back with a thumb and a short prayer. On the catwalk, Lena caught his profile beside the cages, then swung to Caldwell, reading into his phone for a timestamp. The contrast wrote itself. He disliked being a symbol, yet symbols move people faster than spreadsheets, and for once, he welcomed anything that brought momentum. Silence protects nothing. The auctioneer cleared his throat and announced unusual inventory recovered during contract enforcement and sold with documentation. A hush fell across the boards. Cole's pulse found the chance tempo. He checked Titan, Luna and Brutus, then the path between them and the ring gate. He didn't know outcomes, only intentions. Instinct gathered inside his chest like a tide climbing a stone. He remembered writing an unsent letter on a cot, promising to honor a partnership by guarding the vulnerable when the chance arrived. That promise had weighted in bone like a beacon no one else could see. It burned now, steady and cold. When the man in the gray suit lifted a hand toward the microphone stand, Cole stepped nearer the opening in the rail and set his shoulders. He had come for a visit. He found a reckon. Whether the crowd recognized it or not, the stakes reached beyond 3 battered bodies to the shape of the town, looking back at itself. Value can be counted with dollars or with courage. Only one would matter when the chance started again. He breathed once, fixed his target, and waited for the hammer to fall in silence. The heater coughed back to life and the auctioneer raised his mic while bodies pressed to the rails. Cole stepped into the open. Boots brushing sawdust, breath thin, focus on the gate. Simon Caldwell slid a packet toward the clerk, pages stamped and highlighted, title reading, Corporate Recovery, Canine Assets listed in neat lines. Lena Harper filmed the handoff, lens catching Titan's ear tilt, Luna's protective curl, Brutus's guarded stillness. Start it low, someone called, and a small figure went up. Cole matched, then lifted by a careful notch. Murmurs spread, a bidder in camo raised. Another grinned and nudged his friend. Luna shifted to shield her belly from the bars and Lena framed that motion, evidence stronger than any memo. Caldwell edged closer to the mic. Company property, he said, pleasant as paper, subject to transfer restrictions. Cole raised, tone flat and steady. A silver-bearded farmer countered. A man with tire-tread soles joked about Brutus's ear. Heat climbed Cole's neck. He kept his hands loose because tight fingers lead to bad decisions. Scout's ghost steadied him, alley dust a shoulder bump against his knee before turns, a leash going light and never tightening again. Bid with confidence, the caller urged. Lena zoomed in on a date that looked wrong by a week and mentioned it to the live chat while keeping the shot steady. Cole asked the clerk to read the top line. The clerk hesitated. Caldwell answered, smile fixed. Seized during contract enforcement, he said. Another jump from camo. Cole matched and added a sliver. The number climbed into a range where casual interest evaporated. Cards lowered. Only the farmer and the tire treads held on. You breeding the Doberman? Someone asked. Cole ignored the bait and lifted again. The chant quickened. Titan stood stone still, eyes clearer now, simply present. The lens dipped and caught Cole's boots, then Caldwell's polish, then the clerk's pen trembling a hair. Caldwell slid another paper onto the stand, a copy stamped, State Hold Recommended. Cole asked who signed it. Caldwell named a compliance officer, then said liability 3 times. The farmer sucked his teeth and dropped out. Only tire treads remained, grin thinning as numbers rose. Scout's memory tightened Cole's focus. He lifted. The caller nodded, and the gavel tapped. Titan's lot belonged to him. Caldwell leaned to the clerk. The clerk said, release might be delayed, pending verification. Groans followed. Cole faced the board again. The second lot opened lower. Pregnancy frightened buyers who saw cost more than life, yet it drew the wrong men who saw profit before ethics. Tire treads tested the water. 2 new bidders slipped in. Cole raised enough to clear them without swagger. Caldwell read a temperament code that made fear sound like policy. Lena filmed Luna adjusting to cradle what waited inside her, a motion that said more than any speech. Quick bids, short feints, then a leap. Cole followed. One quit. The other stared at Luna's belly, then at Cole's jaw. and hesitated. Cole added a measured step, and the gavel fell. The second lot was hit. Cole turned toward the third cage, where Brutus watched with that sideways focus born of pain and calculation. Before the caller spoke, Caldwell lifted a hand and announced that the Rottweiler had been involved in an incident, urged caution, and asked the clerk to note limitations under corporate policy. The language sounded like safety, felt like sabotage. Lena asked him on camera to define an incident. Proprietary, Caldwell said. Cole ignored the noise and raised the second the number appeared. Tire treads returned, pulled by wounded pride. A wiry man, with quick hands joined from the far side, voice high, moves faster than thought. The lines tangled. Cole kept each raise precise, the rhythm of a plan. Scout's name moved under his breath without sound. Brutus lifted his head. The torn ear twitched once, the smallest salute from an animal who refused to fold. The wiry bidder faltered. Tire treads swore and bumped the price. Cole matched and added a thin edge. For a heartbeat, he met Lena's lens and saw resolve replace strain across his features. He wasn't buying trophies. He was paying a living debt to a silent partner, buried far from this lake. Sold, the caller cried. Caldwell stepped forward with a lawyerly cough and announced payment now, release later, verification pending. Lena asked the clerk to state the policy on living property. The clerk mumbled about discretion, and looked grateful when Cole slid a deposit across the counter and requested receipts with timestamps. He wrote his number, then asked Dr. Nora Bennett to examine each animal on record. Nora nodded and called for basic supplies. Teen volunteers returned with towels, water, and a first aid kit meant for scrapes rather than scars. Luna drank from a shallow pan. Titan watched hands, then sipped when Cole stepped back. Brutus waited, then leaned into the pan. Once the others finished, head low, reading the room while thirst finally won. While Nora checked gums and pulse, Caldwell reappeared with a printout, alleging a pending claim from a subcontractor for property damage caused by canine unit. Cole pressed 2 fingers to the paper and asked for a case number. Caldwell supplied a string that sounded plausible until Lena zoomed close and revealed an old letterhead with a new date. "Are you alleging forgery?" she asked. Caldwell denied wrongdoing, then pivoted to language about protecting stakeholders. He tried to hand the clerk another sheet. The clerk refused, glancing at the camera in the ring where half the town stood listening. The caller announced lunch and promised to resume later. Cole stayed with the cages. What rose inside him felt like an order from a place beyond rank. Stand, hold, finish. Lena lowered the camera and said, "One person can break a pattern for everyone else. If you're hearing this, remember the day you placed yourself between harm and a voice that couldn't argue, the minute you decided presence outweighed approval, and consider what that choice made possible." He asked Nora about a safe window for transport if the release came today. Nora answered that sooner or later. He made 3 calls, lined up a heated boathouse, blankets, a borrowed crate, and a friend with a calm manner and a van. Caldwell paced nearby, phone at his ear, posture clipped, roots forming a sheriff's visit, a last-minute hold, a bureaucratic flood. He checked the clock, the dogs, and the path to the exit. A teenager slipped him a hand warmer. He tucked it through the bars near Luna's paws. Brutus pressed his shoulder to the iron, and stayed when Cole didn't flinch. Titan tracked a gull overhead, then looked back at the man who had chosen him 3 times while everything nearby argued for delay. The caller's bell for lunch rang somewhere beyond the truck line, yet Cole stayed anchored at the cages, counting breath with the dogs until his pulse matched theirs. Lena posted a clip and the stream swelled, names from town stacking on the screen like lanterns in the wind, turning a yard of dust into a gathering. If you have ever carried silence for the voiceless, remember the steadiness that found you then, and let it guide your next step. Simon Caldwell returned from a string of hushed calls with his jaw clenched and a folder of new forms, announcing that Titan, Luna, and Brutus were corporate assets under active enforcement, eligible for immediate retention and transfer pending litigation. Litigation carried across the bleachers like an icy tide. Neighbors weighed risk the way sailors read whitecaps. A handful backed away from the rail, muttering about liability and insurance, while others edged closer to Cole, forming a loose human buffer around the cages. Caldwell presented a notice of possession with blocks of dense text and a clipped signature, then referenced a statute whose number sounded official enough to quiet anyone who didn't spend nights parsing grievances. The clerk held the paper with two fingertips as if ink could burn. Lena Harper filmed the exchange, her viewfinder catching Titan's disciplined stillness, Luna's slow breath over her belly, Brutus's cautious weight shift that said pain lived in the right hind leg, yet resolve still owned the rest. Online watchers multiplied. Comments scrolled like leaves in a gust. Save them, follow process, don't trust suits, protect the town, watch the Marine, believe the vet, check the date, call the sheriff, stay kind. Cole listened to the chant of distant lots and kept his voice level when he asked Caldwell to specify the court and case. Caldwell gave a county, then hedged, saying filings would be finalized by morning, and any premature release could expose stakeholders. The word stakeholders landed like a gate clanging shut. A woman from the clinic asked who authorized the seizure. Caldwell said contractual necessity. A fisherman in an oilskin jacket said necessity had a smell and this wasn't it. Murmurs rose, then flattened when Caldwell flashed another sheet marked State Hold Recommended. Lena zoomed in on the header. The letterhead looked new, the language looked pasted, and the date looked like where a timestamp should have sat. She read the line aloud without commentary. Caldwell smiled and accused her of bias. Someone near the coffee drums said bias cut both ways. A teacher from across the bay stepped forward, voice shaking but clear, and said a community doesn't outsource conscience to paperwork. The split grew wide. Some folks feared the dog's unknown training and murmured about liability if a bite made headlines. Others shook their heads and said fear shouldn't decide fate. Colder air arrived off the water, dimming the afternoon into ice. Cole used the pressure of crowd noise like a shield and opened his phone to show receipts, timestamps, and the caller's record of sale. He kept words simple: I paid for all three, documented, witnessed on camera, and I will take responsibility. Caldwell replied that ownership remained conditional until verification. Meanwhile, the company would arrange transport. Cole asked who would ride inside those vans. No answer came. A deputy finally stepped through the gate, hat low against the wind, and asked everyone to breathe. He examined the paperwork, then said the safest interim plan would be temporary custody with medical evaluation and no movement out of the county until the judge reviewed everything. Caldwell argued that delay invited interference. The deputy said interference had already arrived in the form of half the town with phones raised. He looked at Cole and asked whether a secure site existed for the night. Cole named the boathouse owned by his friend on the sheltered side of the harbor, heated, dry, with power and a camera over the door. Dr. Nora Bennett nodded, volunteering to monitor through evening hours with supplies from the clinic. Caldwell began to object again. The deputy lifted a palm and said the arrangement preserved evidence and safety while limiting escalation. The clerk, clearly relieved, printed temporary custody notes and handed copies to both men. The crowd exhaled at once, a sound like sailcloth easing when the wind shifted. Lena panned across faces, guarded, hopeful, skeptical, angry, moved. She posted a clip that reached beyond the county within minutes. Within an hour, the stream reached docks, barracks rooms, and church basements. Classmates recognized Cole's profile and typed memories of the steady kid who carried other people's packs, while a few warned that mercy without planning becomes danger wearing a smile. A councilman posted that procedures exist to protect everyone. A shelter coordinator replied that procedures fail when written for equipment instead of beings who feel heat, cold, or fear. A retired handler described protocols for decompression and noted that the shepherd's eye contact signaled control, not volatility. A father wrote that his son still flinched at slamming doors, then asked why grown men expect animals to heal alone. In diners and garages, people argued, then went quiet when Lena uploaded 30 seconds of Luna lowering her head onto a folded towel, the camera close enough to catch the twitch in her lip as warmth reached skin that had known nothing but rough boards. The clip did more than any speech. A volunteer called to offer night watch. A grocer pledged kibble. 2 teenagers asked if signs would help. Not every message carried kindness. One account demanded confiscation. Another insisted Cole be charged. Noise thickened, yet beneath it a hum gathered, the sound a community makes when conscience begins to outvote fear. Cole helped load the crates into a friend's van while Nora kept watch, and Lena recorded quietly without turning the moment into a spectacle. Titan went first, stepping in when given room and a second to decide. Luna followed, guided by the shape of the crate and a towel tucked over the floor to soften corners. Brutus hesitated. Cole shifted sideways, not crowding, letting the Rottweiler choose dignity. After a breath, the big head dipped and the body followed. Doors shut. Caldwell called someone with clipped urgency, then trailed behind in his sedan, headlamps on even though dusk had not fully settled. The convoy rolled along Shore Drive, past marinas and shuttered ice cream stands, toward a weathered boathouse tucked behind a line of spruce. The lake gave a slow, hollow knock under the pilings whenever wakes reached the cove. Inside, space smelled of cedar dust, rope and old varnish. A workbench held clean towels, bowls, a portable heater and an extension cord coiled like a sleeping snake. Cole and his friend carried the crates to a corner where blankets already lay. Nora checked the water, set out kibble and wired a camera to a small monitor so the deputy outside could confirm stability without constant entry. Titan stayed up on his feet after the door opened, scanning every nailhead before the tail made a small, almost embarrassed wag. Luna curled with her belly against a folded quilt, eyes half-lidded but alert. Brutus lowered onto his hip, accepted a hand warmer wrapped in a rag, and watched Cole with a frankness that felt like an oath under review. The deputy took a seat by the door and began paperwork. Caldwell arrived a minute later and demanded access to inspect the supposed asset. The deputy allowed a limited walkthrough under supervision. Caldwell circled like an auditor searching for violations. He found none. He shifted tactics, threatening to seek an emergency order. Cole said he would answer any hearing with documents, witnesses and a veterinarian's evaluation. Caldwell stared at the lens on the shelf and fell silent. Lena uploaded a longer cut showing the transfer, the deputy's measured explanation, and the boathouse's condition. Cole focused on the tangible, clean bowls, soft bedding, quiet voices. Nora cleaned a small tear on Brutus's ear with saline while Cole steadied the big head with a palm beneath the jaw. Titan accepted a slow brush that lifted loose hair. Luna drank warm water and closed her eyes in a moment that looked like relief. Every small act felt like a statement spoken without speeches. Lena filmed only what dignity allowed. She turned the camera toward her own face and said, "Moments like this test whether judgment will crush compassion or finally yield. If you have a memory of standing against unfair judgment at a counter, in a hallway, outside a gate, share it because stories teach courage forward." Caldwell stepped back in and tried one more angle, suggesting that high-drive animals couldn't be safely held by private citizens, that liability would ruin anyone involved. The deputy pointed to the monitor, the logs and the vet and said the arrangement looked more careful than many official sites he had visited. Caldwell's mouth twitched. He had not anticipated a town knitting itself around 3 battered creatures and a veteran who refused to let paper erase breath. The night pressed closer, lights hummed, the boathouse settled into a living quiet. Cole sat on the floor near the crates, shoulders against cedar, mind still alert yet less jagged, sensing a perimeter finally holding. Outside, waves ticked against hulls and the deputy's radio murmured in calm bursts. Caldwell lingered in the lot, then drove away, taillights sliding along wet boards like coals. Division remained, and threats would return with daylight, but the center held documented custody, medical oversight, a watchful lens, and a town learning its own way. Cole studied Titan's eyes, then Luna's breathing, then Brutus's steady look that no longer asked only whether escape remained. Resolve answered through the boards, through the water, through the ache behind old scars. Whatever arrived tomorrow, this night would stand. Dawn bled through spruce while the boathouse heater hummed and the deputy signed his log. Cole checked bowls, blankets and the camera, then heard tires crush wet gravel. 2 state vans stopped, lights off, doors opening like a drill. A supervisor held a clipboard, another rolled kennels and a third rehearsed empathy. "Evaluation and transfer," the supervisor said. Dr. Nora Bennett met them with charts and morning vitals, requesting a local review. The order showed fresh stamps and language. Simon Caldwell parked behind in his gray sedan, straightening a tie as if certainty were fabric. The deputy read the warrant, frowned and set conditions: continuous filming, veterinary oversight and no off-route detours. Cole steadied Titan while a ramp slid to the threshold. The shepherd stepped when asked, proud despite ribs. Luna nosed Cole's wrist, then climbed into a crate lined with a cedar-scented quilt. Brutus hesitated until Cole gave space. The big head dipped and the latch closed. Neighbors gathered under red-tipped maples, some supportive, others worried about history they could not see. Lena Harper arrived with her taped camera, whispering that the stream had exploded overnight. She asked for a comment. "Review first, decisions later," the supervisor replied blandly. The doors shut on three faces and the convoy eased along the Cove Road. Cole locked up, thanked the deputy and decided movement beat waiting. He trailed at a distance to a low gray complex by the trees, a state evaluation site of block, chain link and fluorescent hem. Lena parked near a service door used by weekend volunteers. Her old lanyard still pinged the lock. Inside smelled of bleach and metallic water. She filmed wheels and boots, letting timestamps speak. Titan stood square in a run, eyes tracking hands. Luna paced once, then settled with care. Brutus waited by a drain where a bored worker dragged a mop. When the handle bumped his torn ear, he flinched and the gate rattled. The worker muttered about problem stock and jabbed again. Lena's breath shook, her hands did not. Caldwell argued with staff behind the glass about boxes and custody. Cole called Nora to email vitals to the supervisor, then asked at the public desk for a prompt exam. He received polite fog. A maintenance door sat propped by a plastic wedge. Beyond it, a corridor led to scrub that met county woods. Brutus's ear bled at the edge. No one moved to tend it. A memory lit behind Lena's eyes. A friend cornered in a hallway until she stepped in because no one else would. She slid the wedge aside, tested the exit, and pocketed 3 zip ties meant for cables. She showed Titan open hands, whispered and worked an old latch. Twist, lift, slide. The shepherd waited for a point, then moved. Luna next, guided by a palm low to the ground and a tone that promised a path. Brutus last, the hinge loud, patience louder. A guard shouted from the break room. Lena pushed the crash bar and cold pine air poured through. Alarms woke. She muscled Titan, Luna, and Brutus into scrub while sirens began to bait panic. Inside, commands tangled. Outside, saplings flicked and leaves chattered like coins. Titan threaded brush with purpose. Luna chose ground that spared her belly. Brutus limped but refused to slow beyond necessity. At the front, Cole heard alarms and saw staff flood corridors. Caldwell pivoted toward the lot with a curse dressed as outrage. Then Cole's phone buzzed, 3 words and a pin. Out, north edge, help. He moved along the building line into scrub, boots remembering field rhythm, breath rationed. Titan appeared between cedar and shadow, eyes bright. Cole dropped his shoulders, so welcome, red first. Luna followed, ribs working like bellows yet gaze steady. Brutus lagged, blood drying dark against the torn ear. Cole whispered directions rather than command. Lena stepped from the shade, hair plastered, camera bouncing because proof would decide the story later. Handlers crashed through brush behind them. The deputy's radio cut across the pursuit, ordering restraint and noting that a veterinarian had documented injury before transfer. The warning slowed at least one chase. Cole listened for water and heard a creak. He pointed and Titan led down a bank. Cold flooded boots, gravel bit. Luna drank once and pressed on. Brutus stepped in, teeth set, pink spiraling into the current before vanishing. They climbed the far side to a fern floor under sliced sunlight. Shouts thinned. Lena killed her record light, palms shaking now that motion had a margin. Cole felt relief that hurt and fear that weighed more. State custody might have meant another cage. This freedom could turn fatal on a road or in a startled yard. He calculated again, shelter, quiet, medical care, time. He told Lena to circle back, show the deputy everything, and say plainly why waiting would have left a wound untended. She nodded, tears unshed. Before she left, he said one sentence meant for anyone listening later. Sometimes right demands risk, the kind you once took when nobody else stepped forward, the kind that still shapes you. She squeezed his sleeve and slid downhill toward voice. Cole led the dogs along a ridge toward an old service road he knew from autumn hikes. Wind carried the lake smell even here. Titan checked back without anxiety. Luna's gait steadied as brush gave way to pine needles. Brutus kept pace with stubborn grace. Behind the hill, alarms softened into insect idling. The day had bent and every choice ahead would answer for this one. Then the woods erupted again. A handler had cut across and now pushed up the slope with 2 aides and a net. Cole angled left, using deadfall as cover, then eased the trio into a shallow depression veiled by bracken. He placed a palm on the earth, grounding himself in the old habit that calms noise inside. Footsteps passed within yards, talk crackling with frustration, and the word liability repeated like a spell. Aides moved on. The handler lingered, listening. A crow called, the wind shifted, and the man followed his team downhill. Cole waited 10 long breaths, then rode. He set a slow route toward the service road, planning to loop back to the harbor after dark. Lena's text pinged again. Deputy briefed. Footage secured. Nora prepping supplies, public watching. Another message followed, colder. Caldwell demanding charge. Cole pictured the town arguing across screens and kitchen tables. He ached for quiet yet accepted that noise sometimes shields courage while it finds footing. At the road cut he crouched, scanned and crossed. Sun lifted through the clouds and set fire to a patch of maple far down slope. Titan paused there, head high, a silhouette that felt like a promise kept and a debt renewed in the same breath. Cole touched the shepherd's neck, grateful and unsettled. He could not deny what Lena had done or what it demanded. He would own the fallout, stand in front of questions and carry whatever weight followed, because the alternative had already written itself in a mop handle, a rattled gate and a wound ignored. He set his jaw and moved, knowing relief and fear would walk beside him until this ended, and knowing he could live with both. The town woke to noise that felt like weather, swirling from porches to the marina and back into shops where heaters clicked and coffee steamed. Some said the dogs had been stolen from lawful custody. Others said a veteran had prevented a whitewashed cruelty. A few insisted nothing is ever simple when paper meets breath. Screens replayed Lena Harper's clips from the boathouse and the evaluation site, comments stacking so quickly that the community channel's counter lagged behind. Strangers argued about ethics, trespass, chain of custody and the shape of mercy under law. Meanwhile, Cole Ramsey moved along the ridge above the harbor, reading the sign as if the ground were a page written for him alone. Titan's tread kept a soldier's rhythm, toe marks widening only where gravel rolled. Luna's steps curved around roots to protect her belly. Brutus's prints deepened on the right, then evened when pine needles softened impact. He had gauze, a short flask, 2 leashes, a roll of venison wrapped in waxed paper and a blanket folded into his pack. Each find mattered, a single hair caught in cedar bark, a scuffed patch where a dog had turned twice before settling, a shallow scrape that still held warmth. He scattered patience like breadcrumbs, leaving food on a flat stone and backing away until nervous breaths eased. Down in town, rumor braided itself into certainty for anyone who wanted certainty more than truth. Some repeated Simon Caldwell's claims that the trio were company assets. Others cited the deputy's measured compromise at the boathouse. The evaluation site posted a brief notice about an ongoing investigation. Caldwell paced phone first from curb to courthouse steps, arguing that the escape had endangered staff, then insisting that state custody would have ensured safety. His stance changed by the hour but always ended with control returning to his column of numbers. Lena faced a different time. Her older clips surged, then broke across wider feeds. A local station requested permission to air, while a rescue network stitched her boathouse footage with a map of the harbor and a short interview she had done weeks earlier for a school project about service. People noticed the details, Titan waiting for space before stepping forward, Luna relaxing under a folded towel, Brutus leaning his head into a steady palm. Empathy grew teeth. Even those who worried about liability found themselves lingering on the look in a dog's eye rather than the lines on Caldwell's forms. By mid-morning, the courthouse steps turned into a stage. A supervisor from the state site delivered a summary and suggested charges for unlawful entry. The deputy from the boathouse stood nearby with a binder of logs and a face that gave nothing away. Lena arrived with her taped camera and a public defender who had answered her early call. Reporters pushed microphones and asked whether she had forced a door. She said no, describing a propped exit, a mop handle tapping a torn ear and a decision made in seconds because waiting would have turned injury into evidence without care. She did not grandstand. She stated facts and let her footage carry the rest. When a questioner accused her of chasing attention, she tilted the screen toward him and replayed Brutus flinching, then said attention belongs to whoever hurts Lee. Cole, tracking the ridge, heard faint sirens echo from the highway and felt the dogs flinch at distant metal. He crouched in the windbreak and waited until normal harbor noise returned. Shrouds ticking, a gull's complaint near a bait bucket, the dull ring of someone striking frozen hose against a dock. He eased tight into a fern bed, used his flask to rinse Brutus's ear again, and tucked a fresh strip of cloth beneath the torn edge. Luna nosed the blanket, turned once with care, and lay down in a pocket of sunlight where spruce stacked the air against the lake wind. Cole messaged Nora Bennett, who replied with a thumbs up and a photo of warm bedding ready behind the clinic if they could make the cove after dusk. He weighed routes, traffic, and patience, then waited longer because haste breaks fragile trust. By noon the stream had jumped beyond the county. A regional outlet packaged Lena's footage into a segment titled Harbor Divide, and a national rescue blogger amplified it with a threaded timeline. Donations appeared in a shelter fund that had never held more than pocket change. A carpenter volunteered to build temporary runs. A retired judge posted that the chain of custody does not excuse uncaring custody. Caldwell Protective released a statement invoking compliance and stakeholders, then tried to undercut Lena by calling her edits manipulative. The claim wilted when the deputy confirmed that her timestamps matched his log. The town remained split, but the split no longer tracked simple politics or old feuds. It traced a line between people who trusted the smell of paper and people who trusted the look of relief on a creature's face. Late afternoon brought a new voice. Ethan Moore, pale and hollow-eyed, walked into a coffee shop where Lena had promised to meet anyone with information. He had worked short contracts through a vendor tied to Caldwell and carried a thumb drive, copies of invoices, and a map drawn on notebook paper. He stared at the door whenever it opened. He said he had seen vans slip behind a warehouse after midnight twice a month. Gates opened to a floodlit yard, handlers with taped knuckles moving dogs between pens. He said cash payments labeled training bonuses rolled through small envelopes. He said a phrase, proofs of capability, stood in emails like a flag lowered to hide the real world. He willfully signed a statement, handed the drive to the deputy, and asked for a chair because his legs shook. Lena filmed only his hands in the stack of documents while the public defender covered names on the screen. Cole learned about the whistleblower by text while he scouted the ridge. Relief and warning hit together. Exposure could end the pretense that the dogs were cargo. Exposure also painted targets on anyone who had chosen care over compliance. He shifted the trio toward the lakeside where spruce cut the wind and the beach narrowed to cobble. He found a shallow pocket between rocks that held warmer air and let them rest while he scanned the tree line. Titan lifted his head when footsteps cracked somewhere upslope, then settled when the sound passed. Brutus blinked slowly. Luna dreamed, paws twitching against the blanket as if practicing a safer run. Back in town, debate spilled from screens into face-to-face argument. At a hardware counter, two men went from loud to listening when the clerk mentioned his daughter's fear of thunder and how the noise felt from the floor. At the marina, a mechanic who avoided drama handed the deputy a spare memory card and said evidence fails when storage fills at the wrong hour. A civics class posted a montage about rights and responsibilities that thousands watched before the final bell. A shelter coordinator reminded donors that kibble and calm hands matter as much as opinions. Caldwell drove loops past the courthouse and the marina, phone clenched, posture tight. He told anyone who would listen that the county would pay when kind intentions turned reckless. Fewer people nodded now. Late light went copper over the bay when Lena stepped before her lens again. She summarized the day: rumors, a courthouse scene, a whistleblower, documents under review, and a search still ongoing near shore. She did not plead or gloat. She asked viewers to keep watching, to be patient with the process, and to remember that second chances often begin with uncomfortable truths. She closed with a quiet image from the morning: a Marine cleaning a torn ear in a windbreak while a town decided who it wanted to be. Warrants followed Ethan's files. A judge authorized searches for specific lockers and a detached office behind the warehouse. Deputies formed a small team with state police, moved without sirens, radios low, cameras. While officers planned, Caldwell circled the harbor again, jaw grinding like a man chewing ice. A few voices still warned that sentiment would bankrupt the county, but they sounded smaller now, thinned by testimony and tape. Night gathered. Cole watched the horizon until lights along the far shore pricked on and a freighter's horn rolled across the water. He was tired in the way that stiffens a spine, yet steadiness remained. Titan's breathing matched his own. Brutus rested without holding himself ready to bolt. Luna exhaled and pressed her nose into the blanket. Cole checked his phone. Lena's update about Ethan. Nora's plan for a midnight transfer. The deputies promised to keep a car near the clinic. Harbor Springs did not forgive easily, but it remembered service and valued clear eyes. That memory pulled at people who would usually stay quiet. A baker who once chased kids from his doorway left a box by the clinic labeled for the trio. A retired lineman called a cousin at the utility to confirm a street camera near the warehouse kept footage for 72 hours. A teenager designed a poster that read "Not Property," then forgot to print her name. The pastor unlocked the church basement and set out coffee with no speeches. The day closed in a town still split, yet the split no longer felt like a canyon. Evidence had given shape to suspicion. Courage had put skin in the game and care had found hands ready to work. Cole folded the blanket tighter around Luna, scratched Titan's chest and rested his palm on Brutus's shoulder. He did not know what the searches would reveal inside Caldwell's world, or how fast a judge would move once morning arrived. He knew only that momentum had shifted and that the path ahead, though narrow, now had markers he could reach. Together they moved toward town, carrying hope and unfinished answers. Ethan Moore sat in the church basement, clutching a paper cup while a thumb drive glinted between flyers for the town meeting. His eyelids looked sanded, yet his account held steady. Midnight vans slipped behind a warehouse, handlers moved dogs through a floodlit gate, and money flowed through envelopes labeled capability fees. He slid emails, invoices, and photographs across the table, rings scoured into concrete, cash logs and authorizations bearing Simon Caldwell's signature beside phrases like demonstrations for clients and liability rehearsals. The deputy cataloged every item, the public defender documented the chain of custody, and Lena Harper filmed only hands and pages with timestamps steady in the frame. An old receipt showed diesel bought at 2:07 a.m. under community outreach. Ethan said proofs of capability meant staged fights, bruised dogs and buyers convinced that control could be purchased like equipment. Cole Ramsey listened from the doorway, feeling the case align motive to method, signatures to crates, ledgers to wounds. Nora Bennett entered with a field kit and a folder. She had taken a small sample from Titan's rough, matched it to a microchip scan, and sent both to a regional registry. Preliminary markers linked Titan to a bloodline used in military breeding during the years when scouts served, and the pedigree code echoed entries tied to deployment rosters. She could not put Scout's name on a lab printout, Lena narrated, but the lineage fits the training we are seeing. Steadiness, restraint, vigilance. Cole traced the codes, felt grief cool into purpose, and thanked Nora with a nod. Phones chimed as a judge approved searches for lockers and a detached office at Caldwell's site. The deputy announced cameras, a vet on scene, and evidence bags ready. Cole looked around the basement, coffee urns, sheet cakes, folding chairs, volunteer lists offering blankets, crates, rides, and time. Tonight's town meeting had outgrown its original plan. It would now begin with facts and proceed to tasks. Lena prepped a sequence for the projector, the auction, the boathouse, the evaluation corridor, the creek, Ethan's documents and Nora's lineage summary, because clarity changes minds that outrage cannot. Cole hiked the ridge to check Titan, Luna and Brutus before dusk. Spruce held the wind while the bay went pewter. Titan approached without fear. Luna rose carefully. Brutus leaned his head into Cole's palm and exhaled. Water, gauze, a quick check of the ear, a whispered plan, then a return to town. The church lot filled as heaters hummed. The pastor welcomed neighbors and stepped aside. Lena started the reel. The room grew still at the first image of ribs and resolve. Paperwork followed. Caldwell's letterhead with dates that failed to line up. Then the boathouse transfer under the deputy's eye. The evaluation footage ran without commentary until a mop handle touched a torn ear. Air disappeared for a beat. Next came the creek, and the quiet escape sequence was cut to emphasize care. Nora took the front and explained the registry hit, the microchip record, and typical traits from that breeding program. A retired handler in the fourth row nodded and stared at the floor. Cole presented receipts and timestamps. The deputy read the warrant and signaled that the search feed would appear on the screen. The projector split to a live body cam view, Officers opened a side door, lights washed a corridor lined with file boxes, and an office revealed a safe, cash bands, leather and envelopes labeled demonstration. Behind the block, a low ring with padded walls and stained drains confirmed what the documents suggested. A veterinarian documented injuries on 2 animals found crated without water and ordered transport under the care clause. Lockers held cable-reinforced muzzles and training logs using the term temperament proofs. Each discovery landed with the heavy precision of truth. Nobody cheered. Lena muted the feed and turned back to the room. She asked for specific help: transport at midnight, foster space away from traffic, donations to the clinic, and patience while filings moved. Hands rose: carpenters, teachers, dock workers, students, offering lumber, rosters, bays, hours. Ethan stood at the edge of the light and said he would testify under oath. The room stood with him. Cole shook his hand and for the first time spoke briefly about Scout, giving duty a face that lived inside memory and practice. He said steadiness saves lives and that training without conscience turns skill into harm. Nora updated everyone on Luna's condition and the narrow window for safe whelping. The deputy mapped a route to the clinic that avoided watchers. People made lists instead of speech. Outside, the wind climbed the bay, and a horn called from deep water. Text alerts stacked as the warrant team worked. An image flashed showing a corkboard of Corey initials, a ledger with capability fees and a calendar dotted with late-night entries. Another angle captured Caldwell in the lot, phone to his ear, refusing to answer questions. The deputy confirmed the items would be filed before morning with a video attached. The meeting adjourned into action. Lena stayed to package clips into a single thread that viewers could watch end to end. She wanted strangers to see sequence, not noise. Abuse documented, provenance established, searches executed, care planned. Cole walked into the cold and met Nora by the truck. They took the Ridge Road, gathered the trio and drove to the clinic's rear door. Nora tapped a code and spilled over kennels lined with padding. A camera watched the hall. A volunteer sat with a notebook. Inside, stillness ruled. Nora checked Luna, looked pleased and set a plan for overnight monitoring. Cole watched Titan choose a corner that let him see angles without crowding anyone. Brutus eased down, pressed a shoulder into a blanket, and relaxed his jaw. Lena arrived with a cart of supplies donated at the meeting and set it by the sink, then returned to keep the thread alive. Cole stepped outside to breathe and saw his phone light again. Messages from people saying the stream had changed their minds, that evidence had moved them past slogans, that they would show up tomorrow with time. He answered with thanks and directions for those who wanted to help without hovering. A final update arrived from the warrant team. The safe held cash and a notebook listing buyers for demonstrations. Digital copies now sat on 2 drives and a cloud vault maintained by the state. The deputy texted that charges were being drafted and that custody would remain local under veterinary oversight until hearings concluded. Cole pocketed the phone and looked at the quiet building where a small staff was preparing. He felt the center tilt toward daylight. Lena's footage, Ethan's files, Nora's science, the deputy's order, and ordinary people had braided into a single rope strong enough to hold. Tomorrow would require more statements, more care and more patience, but the case no longer depended on hope alone. It had names, dates, images, bloodlines and plans. Harbor Springs, stubborn and tender in the same breath, had begun to rally not around noise but around proof. Cole set his hand on the clinic door, ready to keep watch through the night, determined to see the morning arrive with justice gaining ground. The church bell sent a steady note over Harbor Springs as neighbors packed the town hall, breath fogging in the pewter morning while lake wind twitched the flags and rattled the windows. Inside, heaters hummed, the clerks stacked paper ballots, and a glass jar that usually collected bake sale coins sat beside the sign-in sheet like a talisman of calmer days. Cole waited near a framed chart of the bay, hands still, jaw easy, ready to accept the room's decision because consent matters when a town chooses what kind of place it wants to be. Lena stood by the projector cart with her taped camera and a thumb drive loaded with a clean timeline: the auction ring, the boathouse, the evaluation corridor, the creek, Ethan's documents, Nora's registry hit, the warrant feed. Nora Bennett set a folder on the front table, then slipped to the side, eyes on the door where a deputy guided people to seats, nodding to faces from docks, classrooms, kitchens and the clinic. Simon Caldwell arrived late in a pressed coat, phone at his ear, expression carved into patience that felt like stone. He took a chair near the aisle and set a leather folder across his knees, tapping one corner as if a metronome could keep events on his preferred tempo. The pastor welcomed everyone and stepped back. Lena began the reel without narration, letting the detail work where argument would only spark fresh heat. Ribs under Titan's coat, Luna settling beneath a folded towel, Brutus flinching when a mop handle tapped his torn ear. The boathouse custody under the deputy's calm gaze, the corridor at the state site, the creek escape, the ridge, the clinic door, and then the split screen, showing the search team entering an office with a safe, envelopes labeled demonstrations, and a ring behind the warehouse built for proof instead of care. The deputy read the warrant number and listed the items seized so far. Nora explained the registry match, the microchip record, the bloodline used in military breeding during the years Scout served, and the behavioral markers that fit Titan like a key fits a lock. A retired handler in the third row confirmed the tell's controlled focus, economical movement, restraint under stress. Cole presented receipts and timestamps from the auction, then folded the papers and waited. Caldwell rose with a smile that never reached his eyes and called the footage edited theater, the documents misinterpreted, the search premature. Compliance, he argued, required custody to return to corporate hands before proper placement. The room rustled. A teacher asked why dogs listed as assets showed up in envelopes labeled capability fees. Caldwell said training required demonstrations. A fisherman asked why demonstrations needed midnight schedules and taped knuckles. Caldwell invoked client confidentiality. The clerk cleared her throat and read the motion drafted overnight. Shall the township endorse continued local custody under veterinary oversight, support the county's petition for protective status, and direct resources toward care, while state investigators process evidence and prosecutors prepare charges? The debate opened. A few voices warned about liability and headlines. More spoke for patience and process. One woman described the look on Luna's face when warmth reached skin that had known rough boards. Another man who seldom spoke in public said a ledger that calls fear a capability has no place near this bed. Caldwell tried again, flipping a sheet stamped, state hold recommended. Lena's zoom paused on the header so the mismatched date showed like a bruise. The deputy confirmed the discrepancy and added that a second safe had yielded purchase logs tied to out-of-county buyers. The clerk called the vote. Ballots slid into the jar, paper whispering like small sails catching a harbor breeze. Counting took long seconds that made ribs tighten and hands fold despite every effort to look unconcerned. When the total landed, the room released one breath together. Overwhelming approval for local custody, protective status, veterinary authority, and township support for immediate enforcement. Caldwell stood, color draining, and reached for his phone. Before a call could connect, radios crackled from the doorway. The warrant team had located a second ring behind a sliding wall, recorded handlers practicing with cable-reinforced muzzles, and found a ledger listing cash deliveries aligned with Ethan's invoices. Officers requested authorization to secure all persons on site. The deputy stepped aside so the projector could mirror a live feed. Unmarked units nosed past sheds. A command voice counted down. Then the task force moved clean and fast through the side entrance and across the yard. Caldwell's jaw worked like he had bitten ice. Officers crossed the screen, announced themselves, and pushed through the office where a desk drawer held envelopes printed with the company logo and entries titled Client Show. In the yard, handlers froze under floodlights. Evidence techs bagged gloves, muzzles, and a stack of binders. A supervisor read charges: conspiracy, aggravated cruelty, unlawful exhibitions, falsification, and obstruction. Caldwell tried to slip out of the aisle. The deputy met him in the doorway with cuffs that clicked like a gate, finally closing. The room did not change. It held stillness shaped by fury and relief, the kind you feel after a storm lifts and leaves broken branches where the lawn used to be. Outside, the wind shifted to the west, pushing the lake into a brighter band beyond the square. The pastor thanked people for showing up without turning neighbors into enemies and asked them to carry that discipline into the days ahead when cameras would come looking for a fight. The clerk posted the vote. The board confirmed the township's stance, and Nora gathered supplies for immediate transfers from the warehouse to the clinic. Cole left the hall with the deputy and Lena, past the courthouse steps where reporters had started to cluster, and pointed toward the cove. He knew where the trio would go if the world got too loud. The sheltered line of spruce beside the slip where the breeze slips between pilings and the stones warm faster than the air. They followed the trail under branches that combed the pale light into patterns, crossed a strip of sand where gulls had scribbled half a day earlier, and found paw prints pressed like signatures into damp grit. Titan stepped from the shade first, weight settled, eyes steady. reading posture before committing. Luna slid after him, belly held carefully, breath slow and even. Brutus came last, the torn ear tilted, gaze direct, stance no longer braced against whatever the next minute might bring. Cole crouched without reaching, set his voice in the quiet register that promises room instead of demands obedience, and waited. Titan closed the distance and pressed a shoulder against his knee with the frankness of a soldier recognizing a post worth holding. Luna nosed his cuff, then turned to a blanket he set on the stones. Brutus leaned in, let the palm find his jaw, and exhaled a long thread of air that seemed to pull weight out of the morning. Lena filmed only as long as proof was required, then lowered the lens because some reunions belong to memory more than screens. Waves slid under the dock and tapped wood with a patient rhythm that sounded like a heart settling after a run. Down the shore, sirens faded, replaced by radio murmurs about transport, sealed rooms, and cataloged evidence. The town square began to empty, not toward bar stools or comment threads, but toward tasks, crates to scrub, bedding to wash, bowls to fill, schedules to post, donors to thank, and hearings to attend without shout. Cole looked across the water toward the freighter channel where ships carry weight strangers never see, then back at the three lives whose names the town now used as naturally as street names. He thought about Scout, about promises made on a cot when night felt like a moving wall, and about the quiet tether that had pulled him from a harbor errand into a day that asked for spine, patience, and a refusal to hide behind paper. He lifted his face to the thin light and considered how a single step in an auction ring had bent a river of outcomes. A camera turned on, a whistleblower spoke, a vet matched a code, a judge signed a warrant, officers moved, a town and three animals lay safe by a lake that would still be there tomorrow. If this story sits with you, hold the moment you once made a choice that changed a life, then let it nudge the next one. The distance between harm and help is often the width of a decision made in public where others can steady it. The bell at the church struck noon, the lake flashed silver. Cole rose, nodded to Titan, touched Luna's shoulder, scratched Brutus behind the jaw, and walked with them toward the clinic path, not as cargo, not as symbols, but as lives protected by a community that had learned the power of standing together when it mattered most. Evening light settled over the harbor as Cole eased open the boathouse door and let the lake's clean breath follow him inside. The cedar walls still held rope and varnish, yet a gentler fragrance had taken root: fresh straw, clean blankets, and the faint sweetness of puppy fur. Titan lifted his head first, posture calm, eyes bright, a sentinel who no longer braced for every clang of dock lines. Luna stirred on the quilted nest near the workbench, nudged by three tiny noses and the patient rhythm of new life pressing for warmth. Brutus rolled to meet them with a low, contented rumble that was more greeting than guard. Days of steady care had turned shelter into home. The camera Lena set on a shelf clicked to life on its timer, recording small milestones without intruding. She kept notes with times, temps, feedings, and brief descriptions meant for clarity rather than drama, because healing often whispers. Nora's chart hung beside a coil of line marked with neat check marks. Weight up, hydration stable, ear clean, incision healthy, appetite strong, pups vigorous. Neighbors came in pairs to help with chores, leaving boots by the door and voices at a gentle register, the way you speak in nurseries, chapels, and rooms where second chances take their first steady breaths. Titan had memorized the shape of this kindness. He greeted visitors with level eyes, then returned to a mat facing both door and water, choosing a vantage point that allowed rest without surrender. Muscle returned across shoulders and hips, a map of strength redrawn by good food, patient walks, and time. He took cues with economy, preferred calm hands, and taught anyone watching that steadiness is practiced trust. Luna mothered with brisk competence, counting noses while Cole warmed formula and Nora checked the nursing schedule. The pups latched with conviction, then dozed in a knot of contentment, bellies rising like small sure tides. Brutus surprised everyone with gentleness that felt like an old language remembered after hardship. He learned to wait for a cue before leaning that heavy head into a lap, discovered the joy of tennis balls, and mastered deliberate play that never crowded the puppies. He favored his healed leg less each day, carrying weight evenly now across a frame that read sturdy rather than scarred. Outside, Harbor Springs moved with a new rhythm. The town hall posted updates about the case without spectacle. Volunteers signed shifts for night watch, laundry, transport, and supply runs. then kept those promises with quiet pride. Kids from a civics class hung a banner along the harbor walk that read "Second Chances Love Here," the words painted by many hands in colors that remembered autumn leaves and buoy lights. Fishermen stopped after dawn runs to drop coolers of ice for clinic men. The baker left oat biscuits tied with twine for humans and crunchy treats for canines, a note tucked beneath that simply said, "Carry on." Lena's edit stitched the journey into a single arc that felt honest rather than sensational, leading viewers from urgency into gratitude without losing the edge that keeps communities awake. She closed the piece with still frames of Titan at rest, Luna nursing, Brutus sprawled like a guardian rug, and Cole standing at the big door looking out at the line where water meets sky. Messages arrived from places that do not share our weather but understand our math. Care plus time equals change. Donations covered clinic costs, legal fees, and a modest fund for training classes open to anyone adopting a scarred animal. A retired handler offered free sessions twice a week, teaching leash manners and confidence games that build resilience without force. On Saturday mornings, families gathered by the slips while Titan demonstrated focus drills that looked more like dance than duty. His tail, once a metronome set to vigilance, now kept time with laughter. Luna's brood grew into round, curious explorers who tumbled over each other, learned to pause on a whistle, and gazed at the lake as if they recognized a horizon their mother had defended for them. Brutus adopted the role of bouncer with a poet's touch, big enough to block a doorway when rough play threatened safety, tender enough to nudge a stray tear away when the world outside felt louder than through it all. Cole remained what he had been since the auction present, steady and stubborn about dignity. He rose before dawn to sweep, portion food, walk the shoreline, and sit for minutes that felt like small prayer. He accepted help without theatrics, thanked people by name, and made lists that kept emotion from drowning action. He understood that service lasts longer than applause. The investigation moved where the evidence lay. Charges matured into felonies, arraignments followed, hearings were scheduled, and bonds were set. The case would take months because accountability is slow when done right. Yet optimism settled over the cove all the same, not naive confidence but earned faith rooted in visible change. Titan's coat shone, Luna's body recovered with the serene efficiency of a craftsperson repairing a beloved boat, and Brutus carried himself with the loose, dignified joy of someone no longer waiting for the next blow. The pups met the vet one by one, left with tiny bandanas, and returned to nap piles without complaint. Lena documented milestones without turning lives into content. First solid food, first clumsy chase around a coil of rope, first evening when nobody startled at a slammed car door. She added captions that taught rather than scolded: decompress, hydrate, reward calm, keep routines, and ask for help. Her closing frame showed hands rather than faces, many hands holding leashes with lightness instead of fear. A month after the vote, the boathouse doors were rolled open for a community afternoon that felt like a modest festival. No stage, no speeches, just coffee, cider, music from a single speaker, and a donation jar that filled at a human pace. Children drew chalk paw prints from the ramp to the dock. Teenagers helped elders cross the threshold's lip. Visitors signed cards for the clinic staff. Someone tuned a guitar and found a steady strum that matched the lake's patient knock beneath the piling. Toward evening, clouds parted along the horizon so a bar of molten light stretched between piers like a promise kept. Titan placed himself beside Cole at the end of the ramp, surveying with a calm that read less like watchfulness and more like gratitude. Luna shepherded her brood back to the quilt, counted, and dozed. Brutus sprawled near the heater, chin on paws, ears flicking at footsteps that no longer carried threat. Cole rested a hand on each of them in turn, and let the quiet speak. He had not rescued perfection. He had chosen responsibility, then kept choosing it, and a town had met him at that line, bringing lamps, tools, patience, funds, and time. If you have followed this journey to its harbor, carry forward the lesson repeated in wind, wood, and water. One clear choice can bend a day, then a season, then a town. Maybe your moment waits at a shelter, a fundraiser, a school board meeting, a neighbor's porch, a shoreline after a storm, or a registry page, seeking names for midnight transport. Wherever it appears, meet it with steadiness. Turn on the camera that proves care. Offer your hand. Give what you can without waiting for someone more official to arrive. And if this story moved you, Help it move others. Subscribe so you don't miss the next rescue. Share the thread with friends who might join the work and support local shelters, vetted rescue groups and clinic funds that keep second chances alive. Stories end, responsibilities continue. Let today's resolve last beyond the last frame, because lives like Titans, Lunas, Brutuses and the pups learning the world by the lake are proof that compassion, once chosen, remakes everything it touches. Join us today.